All right. Josh, why don't you go ahead and get started, and I'll keep an eye out for Thomas.
Okay. It is amazing to me that as we each come to this meeting, I mean, some of us are in Atlanta, but we each come from a different place. God has something for each of us. So I don't necessarily know exactly what you need in this moment, but I believe that God does. And he speaks to each one of us according to the grace that we each need. Big picture, just coming off of Easter weekend. And I think that we probably have a grand sense of the grace that God has given each of us, fresh and new in our minds as we think about the death and resurrection, the gift of Jesus on the cross, taking on our sin and death, and that resurrection giving us each the grace of the power of sin over sin and death in our lives. But apart from this amazing grace that we all experience, we each approach God with our own needs for the day. And I don't know about you, but I find that each day God gives me the grace that I need that day. Which drew me to the verse. I've been thinking about this verse, John 1:16. The NIV says it this way: out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. Or in the NLT, it says, from his abundance, we have all received one gracious blessing after another. So just to think about that gift of God's grace for a minute. Just stop for a second and think about the gifts that God has given you. The grace that he's worked in your life. Yes, Jesus died for each of us, but he continues to give grace in our lives. The scripture says his mercies are new every morning. And for me this Easter season, I had the opportunity to be a part of a production at the Croc Center right across the street from where I am now called Journey to the Cross. I know some of you were able, actually a couple of you probably were able to see it, but the whole idea behind Journey to the Cross was a silent disco. If you've anybody been to a silent disco? They are popular at youth councils right now. The idea is you put on a headset at a silent disco and everybody can listen to the music station that they want. So you're all listening to different music and kind of dancing. This was not music and dancing, but walking people through the journey of the cross. So the actors didn't have to memorize a whole bunch of lines. All the lines were recorded. So everybody started in the chapel. We started with Adam and Eve, and then we kind of walked through like a Stations of the Cross. And I was John, one of the disciples. And so people started in the chapel with Adam and Eve, and then they went on a kind of a journey through Jerusalem, meeting Caiaphas, and eventually being directed to the Last Supper, and then to the Garden of Gethsemane, and then both to Pilate and to Herod before winding back in the chapel with the cross. But that opportunity for me to be John just caused me to pause and to think about what would it have been like to have been John, particularly John. What would it have been like to be one of the disciples at that Last Supper, to have Jesus wash my feet, or to be one of the three that were taken a little further in the garden just to fall asleep? What it would have been like when Jesus was arrested, or to be with Mary at the cross. And I think about the disciples in that Holy Week and all the emotions and what they would have gone through on Saturday and then even on Resurrection Sunday. The grace that Jesus offered each of the disciples as he was raised again. So I was grateful just for that gift, for me just to think a little bit differently this Good Friday in particular about the grace that I was given, just to think about what would it have been like to have been John. I don't know what grace God has given you today. Today, the grace that I needed after a long Easter weekend, I needed some rest. I appreciate that God gave me that rest today. I needed some fellowship with dear friends, which I had earlier today, and it was just what I needed for today. All this thinking about the grace that God gives out of his abundance to us made me think of a song from our songbook, song number 30. He giveth more grace. And the words say, he giveth more grace as our burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength as our labors increase. To added afflictions, he addeth his mercy. To multiplied trials, he multiplies peace. His love has no limits. His grace has no measure. His power no boundary known unto men. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. So I don't know what it is exactly that you need today, but I do know that his grace is sufficient and God gives abundantly. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you for the gift of grace. We are mindful as we celebrate the cross and the tomb, Lord, of what that means in our lives, Lord. We're so grateful for that gift. Lord, I pray over our time here this evening that we would encourage one another, that we would embrace the grace that we give each other this evening. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you,
Amen.
Josh. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. And I had this all ready to go. And of course, I can't find it. Okay. John just sent his article, and Anita has not had a chance to look at it. His is called, what is yours called, John? I just saw it.
It's called After the Harvest.
After the Harvest. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm looking on my email at the same time I'm talking to you. I know it looks like I'm looking right at you, doesn't it? But you're wrong. All right. Okay, yeah, After the Harvest. So Anita, that's his. So we'll go with it's probably as I took myself off my other email that I was looking at. I'm okay. I'm put together. Don't worry, this is fine. All right, Susie, since we're talking about Singapore and you, why don't you go first, and then Josh will give you some feedback on yours. All right.
Okay. Mine is titled Finding Jesus in the Chronicles of Jonah. Lent is an invitation to embark on a journey of examination, repentance, spiritual growth, and rebirth. Jonah received a similar summons, but chose an entirely different itinerary than the voyage God called him to traverse. Jonah was a prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel during the reign of Jeroboam. He was one of the 12 minor prophets, and among those Jesus personally referenced. Jonah was infamously known as the only prophet who tried to run from God. The book of Jonah begins with God instructing the prophet to rebuke Nineveh for their sinful way of life. The city was notoriously evil and destined to experience doom. To make matters worse, the Ninevites were enemies to the Israelites. With the city's reputation, it is no wonder Jonah is reluctant to hand deliver God's message. He boards a boat to Joppa, heads west to Tarshish, and waves goodbye to Nineveh. God responded to Jonah's rebellion through a violent storm that shook seasoned sailors to the core. They cried out to their gods, while Jonah slept through the chaos without remorse for his actions. In desperation, the seafarers threw Jonah into the raging waters. We may expect Jonah's Chronicles to be one of the shortest Old Testament books, ending at Joshua 1:15 and 16. But God works in an unlikely way by appointing a great fish to swallow Jonah. This is not by chance. God's actions have a purpose. Our Western culture values cause and effect, and we are tempted to think of this massive fish as an agent of God's wrath. There is something far more significant than blame happening in the belly of this giant aquatic creature. Something holy mingled with fish guts and digestive juices. The Hebrew word used for the belly of the whale is the same word used in Genesis 15:4 and Ruth 1:11 to describe a woman's womb. It is not the expected word that translates as belly, later used in Jonah 2:1. Why did the language change? Scholars believe that Jonah entered a time of learning, growth, and development so that he may come out of the womb as a new person. The imagery shows us that Jonah went through a type of rebirth. Isn't that what we seek for ourselves during Lent? Baptism symbolizes the process of spiritual death redeemed into spiritual life. Similarly, Jonah enters the waters of the raging sea as a doubt-filled and rebellious person. He comes out of the water as a new person filled with faith, ready to live a life of obedience. The people of Nineveh respond to Jonah's message by repenting and fasting. The response is so complete that the king of Nineveh calls for a citywide turn from their evil ways. God relents, and the Ninevites are saved. Jonah's reaction to their repentance is surprising. He expresses anger that God spared the wicked city and its inhabitants. Who among us can judge Jonah? We each face our raging sea, belly of the whale experiences. Will we emerge from the waters of adversity looking like Jesus or Jonah? Jonah was asleep on a boat in the middle of the sea during a great storm and was thrown out of the ship for the storm to cease. During a great storm, Jesus was asleep on a boat in the middle of the sea and commanded the turbulence to stop. Jonah forcefully went into the whale's belly for 3 days. Jesus was in the darkness of the bottomless abyss, humbled himself even to death, and stayed in the tomb for 3 days. Jonah begrudgingly went to Nineveh and was disappointed when God relented and forgave the Ninevites. After 3 days in the tomb, Jesus willingly provided forgiveness, salvation, and reconciliation for all people from all nations. Jonah and Jesus were both intimately connected to the most unexpected image that would lead to the protection and reconciliation of many. For Jonah, the picture was a fish. For Jesus, the unimaginable canvas was the cross. Andrew Knowles states, Jonah gives us one of the Bible's great images of God's power to save. Just as Joseph was rescued from prison to become prime minister, and Daniel was kept safe among lions, Jonah is reserved in the belly of a great fish. These episodes prepare us for their greatest sequel, the resurrection of Jesus from the tomb. Jesus went into the depths of death and experienced the utter loss of God, but was raised as the ultimate proof of salvation. Today, the unlikely symbol of the cross reminds us of God's love and protection for us. It was on the cross that Jesus paid the price for our sins. Through the resurrected Jesus, we have the power to emerge from Lent reborn. Will you show up on Easter Sunday dressed in your Easter finest, looking like Jesus or Jonah?
Very good. All right, Josh, lead us on.
As always, I love reading Susie's writing. So there's not stuff to pick apart with the writing is good. And I think that's the case here. So I more have questions for Susie, like who's the specific audience for this piece?
Well, I consider myself a women's writer, but I'm trying to break out of that mold. Since I'm going to be a program secretary, I'm going to need to, expand my platform a bit. So I was really thinking about, I actually used this 2 years ago as a sermon at Atlanta Temple during their Lenten season, which was men and women. So I think that the audience could be both men and women.
Yeah, it seemed to be more assumption that people would know what all was entailed in Lent than there was with the prophet Jonah. To go into that level, particularly at the very beginning about being a prophet in the northern kingdom, one of the 12 minor prophets and all that. I thought your point was fine without maybe some of that background. Apart from that, I think there was other places that I would have wanted more depth, like about the womb and what all that symbolized at that part. And it seemed also like who are we to judge Jonah? And then it seemed like to go straight away into, well, let's be more like Jesus than Jonah, which felt a little bit like judging Jonah to a degree. There's a part about Jesus being on the tomb, and then right below that, it says the canvas was the cross. So it seemed like the connection continually between Jonah was the fish in the tomb, as opposed to the cross. That was about it. It also seemed like the whole being reborn and being new when he came out didn't totally fit with Jonah's character when he does go out and do what God's asked him to do, but he seems like the same guy that's still kind of mad at that point. So it doesn't feel like he's fully reborn to me in that story, which is kind of where you get to in the end. It kind of leaves it to a point that doesn't feel like the fish was totally a reborn situation.
Good.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Susie, I think you're a master storyteller, and I would have loved to have more stories, more of it told in a story form that caught my attention.
I love some of the terminology, some of the sentences, the combinations. Well put, good choice of words, and describing things. Lent, I have to say that Lent seemed like it was an intruder to the story instead of, the heart of the story. I didn't see it as the heart of the story. I got into the comparison between Jonah and Jesus and so forth, and I thought that was said really well. But Lent seemed to be sort of introduced in certain places because that was the theme maybe for the day, that caused you to put the thing together to begin with. But I think you could probably have escaped that or let that part out largely, and we wouldn't have missed much of anything in the story.
Anybody else?
Who is Andrew Knowles? I don't know who he is from your article. Maybe just a short sentence to pinpoint the significance of that reference would be good.
Okay, good.
Yeah, or mention, cite the book that you by him.
Okay.
In his book, I think that would be enough. I don't think you have to give a whole lot of background on him. Because then if people want to know who he is or whatever, they can go find him. But that'll tell you, rather than, unless he's a writer in a commentary. But again, you could say that in his commentary on Jonah. Okay. All right. Anybody else? I just have a couple of things then. The end of the first paragraph, the word traverse. Traverse is kind of one of those archaic words. And we just say travel, called him to travel. It's not a wrong word, and I want to make that very clear. It's not, and it's used correctly. It's just kind of a strange word in where we are in 21st century. In the fourth paragraph, you did a nice thing. I am partial to things being said in three phrases. You did that, so you warmed my heart. Thank you. But you said, he boards a boat, he heads west of Tarshish, he waves goodbye. So you have three very good verbs that tell us the progress of him leaving. I really like that. So I just, you get a little star on your forehead for that one. And then that whole thing about the belly of the whale being a womb, I'm just never had heard that before. I don't remember hearing it. I was rather intrigued by that. And like the rest, I thought, as already been mentioned, maybe a little more development on that. But that was to me, that was a very, we're assuming you're addressing this to mature Christians, is what I'm looking at here, who have a Bible knowledge. So when you tell them a story that everybody's heard since they were like 3 years old, you know, but then you throw in this really interesting, intriguing, bit there with that, people like me want to say, tell me a little bit more about that. But I really like that you brought that in, and I just wanted to say that to you. I thought it was very good. I agree. I obviously did this for Lent, but this is not, I don't think that Lent specific, except maybe your application at the end, because this will work anytime. This is a kind of one of those it'll work anytime. The comparison between Jonah and Jesus, I think, we have these types of Christ in the Old Testament. We all know that, but they all break down at some point. And you have to be real careful now about not straining that too much, because as Josh said, at the end, Jonah was a little stinker about everything. And, that wasn't very Christ-like. So that's the technical term, by the way, in writing, is stinker. So, and one other thing, I think there might be one word you've got wrong in a quote, and that Knowles quote, the third line, you said, Jonah is reserved in the belly of a great fish. I think that's supposed to be preserved. I think that would make more sense if the word is preserved. So you might want to check that quote again. If he wrote reserved, you have no choice but to quote it exactly as he said it. But to me, it would meant preserved would make more sense. So I'm just guessing that, because I haven't seen where this quote came from. So any questions or comments on that, Susie?
No, these are all very, very helpful comments. So thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we'll go. Anita, I know, has to leave us a little bit early. So Anita, I know you haven't seen this article, so just do the best you can after John reads it to us, okay? So John, please read your article. And a couple things, John, put your title on, put your name on. And I realized you were kind of trying to get this done at the last minute, but
yes, my apologies. Okay.
Yeah, well, we'll send you a bill. Okay, so go ahead, John, and start reading.
All right. It's been 2.5 years since the day the entire world was plunged into the dark judgments of heaven. The harvesting rolled in like a sudden storm, stealing millions from the earth in what seemed like something you'd see in a science fiction movie, only it was real and far more terrifying than any fiction I'd seen. Chaos and confusion seized every country. Looting, riots, violence, and fires blazed across entire cities as lawlessness broke out like a flood. It was as if the entire planet had suddenly lost its mind and began consuming itself. In the first few hours, from what I can remember after the harvest, I remember thinking initially this was either some kind of alien attack or some sort of new technological warfare, evaporating people at random. Video footage began to surface online, with vehicles crashing, crowds storming out of buildings screaming, and people disappearing in mid-conversation. It didn't take long before I'd stumbled across some information in reference to the Bible, describing this event as the great and terrible day of the Lord. And then it hit me. When I was young, I remembered going to church and hearing a preacher talk about the end times, warning of God's judgment against the wickedness of humanity. He said there would be terrible plagues, natural disasters, and wars to follow the day of Christ's return for his church. I didn't think much of it at the time, as most kids at that age had far more important things to think about. Most of my friends didn't seem to care much either, since it seemed such things would either never happen in our lifetime, or at least not until we were much older. Some of my peers convinced me these were just religious tactics to try and scare people into religion. Life since the harvest has been far more difficult than I'd ever imagined possible. Soon after that great and terrible day, the one world order OWO, was established as a global response to the initial outbreak of chaos and violence. This global government established an international charter and moved to replace independent national currencies with an international digital currency. It didn't take long for people to get with the program, since the global bank could flag and restrict access to your funds if you violated the orders and regulations of the OWO. Within the first 6 months, I quickly realized these things seemed to be lining right up with the warnings of the Bible. In the book of Revelation, it says both small and great, rich and poor, slave and free were to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. Along with controlling access to your money, they can pinpoint your exact location using the same digital implant on your right hand or forehead. This is no coincidence, it's prophecy playing out in real time. Those of us who caught on early discovered ways to avoid the system, but they didn't come easy. We had to find ways to forage and grow our own food. We made bunkers underground and off the grid to avoid detection from enforcement patrols. It's difficult to know what's happening in the world because electronics give off frequencies that can be detected, and anything connected to the web that isn't authorized can give away our location and operation. Unfortunately, some of us have been captured, tortured, interrogated, and even executed, trying to gather information on our people. Although life is hard, we know that if we were to give in to the demands of the OWO in exchange for comfort and convenience, we would suffer a fate far worse than if we were to die by their hands. In light of all these things, I can no longer afford to ignore the warnings of the Bible. God gave us fair warning about the consequences of sin and rebellion against his will. He warned us of his imminent judgment. He warned us against putting our trust in the world instead of his will. I've had a lot of time to think about these things these past 2.5 years. I certainly don't want to spend the rest of eternity thinking about these things alongside the wicked cut off from God's presence. As it is, I have plenty of regret in knowing God gave me plenty of opportunities to give up my life of sin and put my faith in Jesus. If I had had a chance to go back and make changes, I would have listened to the preacher instead of my friends.
Very interesting. All right, Anita, why don't you lead the way, please?
I have to say, having just kind of looked at it just in these last few minutes and hearing it, I at first thought this was about the COVID. I just assumed that's what it was about. As we went on through, I'm like, maybe, probably not about COVID, probably about the record of what we used to read as kids, the Left Behind and that kind of thing. So I'm not really sure which one it is. The other thing, I suspect in the rush to get it done, you didn't run the editor function, and there's probably about 15 errors coming up as I scroll through it. The little one that always gets me is that comma before an and. I always leave those off, have to go back and put them in. But otherwise, it's a very intriguing article and definitely makes you stop and think. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Left Behind series was a fascinating one. And there's a couple evangelists who have taken an approach about leaving material behind for those who have not been raptured. And so the world's going into chaos, one world, whatever. Have you ever seen or heard of this guy? I don't know how to get it in.
Just
Oh,
hold
it's
still.
blurring.
Yeah, it'll focus if you just hold still.
It's called "Where Are the Missing People?"
There you
I
And
haven't heard of that one.
it's by a guy named Jimmy Evans. He's got a website or a television program called Tipping Point. And it just says what happens when the sudden disappearance of millions of people just go away or gone, and then what happens with what's left. So this third paragraph, I love the concept. I love the idea behind it and the good description. When I first got saved, I said to the officers, I just watched Left Behind. It was in the 70s when I got saved. And I said to my first officers ever, I said, well, when you're gone and no longer around and nobody can count for it, that's when I'll give my life to the Lord, because I'll know then that everything you've told me is true. Well, gratefully, I came to an understanding that the Bible was to what your guy at the end said he wishes he did. But I love the whole concept, and I think it's very timely, among other things. I don't know when you wrote it and how much time you gave to it, but some slight inconsistencies when you have your second paragraph, third paragraph. Oh, it hit me. When I was young, I went to church once and I heard a preacher talk about end times. You kind of talk about that, but then when you go down a little further, you're nailing the book of Revelation and so forth, that only somebody who studied and knew, something.
Right. Yeah, I think that I'm not good about showing that there has been progression throughout that 2.5 years in his recollection of everything that's happening. So at first introducing, there's some pieces there that it could be dressed up better. So,
a minor thing. I love the direction it went, and description. It almost defines what I might have been if I had gone that route some years ago instead of the believer I am today. But thank you.
Appreciate the words, Mike. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Anita said she was thinking about something else. I was thinking that it was going a different direction altogether, and I was thinking about the bubonic plague in Europe and how it devastated. People were dying by the millions and being drug out and burned in the street because they couldn't bury them anymore. So it's interesting where your mind goes with this, because it is so it's kind of like reading very descriptive science fiction, whereas there's a lot of descriptive terms, a lot of adjectives throughout it. So it's interesting how what we thought it was to begin with.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, I like this, so I just will say that to you. It does have a science fiction feel to it, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's a genre, that's a type of genre, but certainly there are people who love science fiction who would never picture themselves sitting down to read anything of a Christian nature. So I think in that way you could get a hook with somebody who might not normally look at like a straight Christian article by taking this approach. So I think the idea is a good one. And I guess my question is then, in your own mind, John, who are you addressing this to? Who is this? What's your audience?
I think the idea that I was going for there was kind of like almost like a found footage kind of thing. If you've ever seen a film that looks like found footage, but this is kind of just like scribblings to recollect the experience that this person is going through after 2.5 years into the tribulation. It's just kind of like a journal that they have. I was having trouble as I was working my way through this, and I had rewritten it several times, which is probably why I ended up rushing to get through it, because it just wasn't turning out the way that I wanted to. Was trying to figure out who the audience was supposed to be. I knew the idea that I wanted to go for, but I just couldn't figure out exactly how to deliver it. Was this like something that somebody received through some future deliverer or something? I don't know. I really struggled with that.
Well, I would say this to you, that here's the deal. I mean, I can see that okay. let me say, the first thing I wrote down on this is, in your mind, you have like the thing that was said by Anita and by Thomas both, was this, when is this? And so the date, what is the date? Well, obviously you mean sometime in the future, but not too far in the future, because you're referring to technologies which exist now. You're not making up new technologies. So you're talking about something that everybody could picture in the 2023 world that we live in, with digital, stuff and all that. But there's still, it's obviously still something of a future date, because we're here and it just hasn't happened. And then you have to add 2.5 years to, if it was like right now when the rapture occurred, so it gets into like 2026, is it 2027? I don't know. So I think it would be good somehow to think that through a little bit. The other thing is, if this has happened to everybody, then everybody knows this already. You see what I'm saying?
That's what I mean. I ran into a conflict with figuring out, okay, well, who is this supposed to be written for then? Because everybody knows that this has happened. So
well,
is it for posterity? Because,
yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I just think you have to make up your mind and work at it that way. So this kind of an approach, again, I think it's a very good approach for an unbeliever to be a bit intrigued by what you're talking about. I think the believers are going to say, oh yeah, I know he's talking about the rapture, he's talking about the tribulation, I got this. But if you're looking at an audience like that that's an unbelieving audience, and you want to bring them in, and then the question is, how do you land it, or how do you end it up? And I think that's a lot of, you have to kind of give a lot of thought to this type of a piece about where you're starting, where you're going with it, and where you're ending, and when will this be read. And I think the idea of it being a journal is a good idea. But presumably by the time people read it, the tribulation has ended. Or you can say, or maybe here at the bottom you might say, if I am arrested, I'm leaving this for you, So then it could still be something that would be relevant, if you know what I'm saying, to someone in that same time period. Like maybe one of the guys who came to arrest you, they find this and they're digging through your stuff and they say, oh, okay, okay, blah, blah, blah. Oh, so this is what it's about. Why are these guys hanging out, not getting the digital, mark of the beast on them? So again, I think that just you need to develop the idea a bit further, but your writing with it I think it's a good approach, in my opinion. I don't write this kind of way. It's not my type of writing, but we need people who can write that way with a Christian voice. So, I would encourage you with it.
Yeah, that's why I didn't put like scripture references in. I mean, I talked about the book of Revelation, but I didn't give chapters and verse, and I didn't use the word rapture specifically. I referred to it as the harvest. So it's not quite as easy to identify that this is from a Christian perspective. So yeah, but I appreciate all the tips and pointers. Really, really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I think again, I like that you did avoid a lot of heavy scripture because you're not writing. I took it immediately. You were not writing for Christians. You're writing for unbelievers, and so you don't want to turn them off with a lot of that. All right.
Can I add one thing before we go on? A couple of years ago, I went to a big writers conference, and I was blown away by the number of Christian science fiction writers that were there. So there is a huge market for that. But I also, at that same conference, went to a class that was taught by a gentleman who wrote for screenplays for movies. And he did the entire class on seeing your writing through the lens of a movie camera and it being played out. And I think that with science fiction, that could help you get over the hurdles that you're finding yourself in, is if you can kind of put a different lens to it and start seeing it maybe as, being played out in a movie scene. That might help you get through some of those places that you're getting stuck in telling the story.
Listen, this is so time for me. I think I mentioned this last time, but there's a wonderful company called Writer's Digest. I think I've talked about this before. Please forgive me, but they have I think it's a quarterly magazine. It's really great. Obviously talks about nothing but writing. And if you want to help develop your writing, look at that magazine. One of the things they have every year is an issue that talks about all the writers' conferences around the country. Oh, actually in Canada too, it's outside the country, but it's really very good. The other thing about Writer's Digest, just go to writersdigest.com, no apostrophe, obviously, or space. They have a series of books about how to write science fiction, how to write mysteries, how to write novels, how to write nonfiction, how to write magazine articles. Just really, they're not real big. I mean, you could easily read them in a few hours. And they have step-by-step things you can do to improve your writing. So if you have trouble like setting a scene, there's a book about how to set a scene and how to describe it so you can bring your people in and draw your people in. They've got all sorts of really great resources. They're not Christian, I'll say that to you, but there's nothing a Christian would object to. It's just about how to do the craft of writing. And so I strongly suggest that if you really want to develop your writing, especially over the summer, maybe some summer reading, Writer's Digest is a good resource. I'm not getting paid anything for this, by the way. I get no kind of kickbacks. But when I was starting to write, I was buying their books right and left. I really was, because I just consume those things. So there it is. That's free. Again. Okay, Thomas. I'm saving Sarah for last. I'm just causing her to absolutely be apoplectic by the time we're done. But anyway, right now it is Thomas who's going to share what he has written. And Thomas, you should give a little background first about what you're doing here, and then Mike will give some feedback.
Unplug, unmute.
Thank you. Let me apologize to the group first. I know that there's the word count, and it was no more than 1,000. This is about 1,500 or whatever. I'm sorry. Listen, I told Alan a while back that I was going to take a hiatus from writing because I am really diving deep in writing a book. And he said, well, throw a chapter at us. So I'll present that. So this is chapter 1. And so take it for what it is. It's still a lot of stuff to go through. And so I apologize. It's written for officers and Salvationists. That's the audience here. It's not evangelical. Not trying to evangelize outside people. It's addressing who we are. So with that, here we go. Chapter 1, Original Salvationists. Step into a group of long-serving Salvationists discussing the Army we all love. And at some point, you will probably hear stories about how wonderful and vibrant Corps life used to be. Memories will be shared detailing well-attended Corps meetings, past divisional events that commonly held hundreds, if not thousands of people, or reports of how territorial gatherings used to fill civic arenas. Often these descriptions are packaged with gloomy images of today's Army or pessimistic statements about what the future holds for our movement. These cynical conversation starters sometimes include words like, the Salvation Army used to be so much more. I remember when my Corps was. Remember when we as an Army. If William Booth were alive today, he would. The Army needs to change to be more like. The administration of the Army is so. Why doesn't the Army? This isn't my Army anymore because. It's easy to feel a sense of foreboding when we compare attendance numbers or redeemed soul counts to those of past generations. As proof of a decline, we need to look no further than at the photographs of previous generations hanging on the walls of our Corps that show large brigades of youth, full bands, or crowds of previous generation soldiers attending glory-filled divisional rallies, or feel a sense of loss by paging through old-style Corps roll books and seekers registers filled with names of those from the past who committed themselves to God and the Corps. And of course, all these past glories can be verified by the testimonials of older soldiers or retired officers who begin their recollections with the phrase, "I remember when." There are undoubtedly significant changes facing our generation of Salvationists. Many of today's soldiers wonder how we can grow an army that works within a society becoming increasingly hostile to Christians and the Christian message. What can we do to impact a community where the fastest growing idol being worshiped spiritually is me? How can we make inroads into the hearts and minds of the masses when the very mention of the name Jesus is met with the voices of those who have determined that Christianity is hate speech? Or how do we motivate soldiers with uniforms hanging in their closets who would rather follow Jesus from a recliner, flipping channels between TV preachers and reruns of Murder, She Wrote or Sports Center? Our challenge as people who love the Army is determining how we can address these downward trends. One place we can start is by reaching back in history to learn from those courageous individuals who built this movement. But which generation? The one that served in the trenches of World War I? Those Salvationists who fed the masses in soup lines during the Great Depression? Or what about the generations that opened the Army work in country after country around the world? Indeed, all these soldiers and officers from every age should be revered for their service to Corps and kingdom. However, let us begin at the beginning to focus on those who ministered to a society hostile to their efforts. We can learn much from our courageous spiritual pioneers who scratched an organization out of the gutters where none existed. It was these early soldiers and officers who worked with few resources and endured tremendous adversity for the cause of salvaging souls while they're laying the foundation for our international army. Imagine capturing the essence of original Salvationism and incorporating their vision and courage into our Corps today. What would happen to our Army if a new generation of committed Salvationists fueled a fire to ignite a new movement that would set the organization ablaze? Imagine being part of a Corps congregation filled with vibrant, evangelizing soldiers continually adding to their numbers, to experience overflowing youth programs that disciple young people toward building large brigades of Corps cadets being trained for future spiritual leadership, to witness a territory of Corps that produced so many cadets for training. Alternative systems for equipping soldiers for ministry would have to be developed because the training colleges would be too full. It may seem like fantasy, but consider what the founding generation accomplished while being jailed, beaten, and abused. The writings and actions of the founding Salvationists demonstrate that they were people who did not allow hardships to dissuade them from their purpose. They vigorously sought lost souls and expected God to spiritually show up and redeem lives. They did not desire to mirror the society they encountered by compromising truth, but ran straight against the worldliness they found. As individuals, they did not wait for someone else to spread the gospel, but took that responsibility upon themselves. They did not seek approval from societal, religious, or governmental agents to guide their thoughts and actions, but rested on Christ's directive to go into the world and make disciples by any means possible. First Salvationists were very much like the first generation of Christians. Both existed and exploded in growth within a world that despised them. They were considered outsiders who were dangerous because of their countercultural beliefs and actions. Paul summed up this idea in his letter to the church of Galatia. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. The first generation of Salvationists could have played it safe and stayed within their Corps walls, but instead they put themselves on the front line of the spiritual battlefield. A key to their success was that each soldier embraced the idea that they've been divinely called to fight in a war with eternal consequences. Every Salvationist was determined to charge directly into the enemy's camp with flags unfurled, rescuing people as they went. William Booth, writing in the 1882 pamphlet, Whom to Believe and What to Believe about the Salvation Army, stated, "We teach all saved men and women that they ought to lay down their very lives for the salvation of others. That being followers of Christ means sacrificing all of our interests and enjoyments and possessions, our lives, to save a rebel world, and that whoever does not so bear the cross has no right to expect the crown." The founder did not reserve the spiritual obligation to reach the world to only the officers or soldiers who held local positions. It was the God-given duty to every redeemed individual. As we watch today's world run to the altar of self-worship, our generation of Salvationists should be encouraged by the opportunity we have to plant the flag of faith and to make our stand for the cause of Christ. We can imitate the first generation of Christians and original salvationists who were earth shakers and soul claimers. We can stand fully exposed for all to see as a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that we may declare the praises of him who has called you or us out of darkness into his wonderful light. 1 Peter 2:9. As soldiers and officers who wear the mantle of today's army, we can fight the good fight of Christ's preeminence or give in to the worldly standard of being as unoffensive with the gospel as possible. We can choose to surrender in the face of societal hostility, believer apostasy, and rampant humanism, or we can set our feet firmly on the foundation of Jesus Christ and fight for every lost and wayward soul within our reach. Will we demonstrate the courage of our original forefathers and foremothers, or will we play it safe? Will we fight, or will we be observers of souls walking by us into eternal destruction? Our answer to these questions will echo throughout eternity. The founder, William Booth, made his choice when he said, while women weep as they do now, I'll fight. While little children go hungry as they do now, I'll fight. While men go to prison in and out as they do now, I'll fight. While there is a drunkard left, while there is a poor lost girl upon the streets, while there remains one dark soul without the light of God, I'll fight to the very end. And then I'm going to end each chapter with just a couple of reflection questions, which are there.
Okay, Mike, why don't you start us off?
Wow. I can't wait till you're done with your book.
Thank you.
This is a great start. If it's an indicator of what the whole thing is going to be about, I'm looking forward to reading it. There are some powerful phrases and sentences in here, and I appreciate the relevance and the way you've expressed it. A couple things that just stood out to me a little bit. It took you almost 3 pages to start talking about the original Salvationists. So your title is Original Salvationists, but like on page, you're on page 4. Then you say the first generation of Salvationists could have played it safe. You started describing them pretty clearly. Now you had hit some of the themes earlier, but I wonder if the title might be, in some regards, better if it was like Salvationism, because you were hitting the theme of the go for souls and go for the worst and do it with all your heart and do it now and so forth. That's consistent all through the thing. But the Salvationists part, right now, you start off the first 2 pages with people questioning the army, and then you hit into, the originals. So just a thought.
No, that's actually good, Mike, because the working title of the book is Salvation. I call it First Generation Salvationism for Today's Army. So it's actually in the title is Salvationism.
There you go.
So
well, it lends itself.
I started out using first generation again and again and again. And then I had somebody that I was just talking to about it that took it to mean everybody who's not a legacy officer or soldier. So I had to back off that. And that's when all the original language started. And I tried to find language that wasn't first generation, because that is so easily
misconstrued. Yeah. I don't have any trouble with original at all. It was well said, and interesting that you were the title is moving in that direction. It looked initially. There's 2 sentences on the first page that just 2 little phrases that I think were out of line a little bit, because you're either trying to prove what you're saying, that it's gloomy, depressing, declining, and so forth in the first 2 paragraphs, or you're saying this is what people are saying. And so when you get down to after you go through the phrases, the good questions, the army used to be so much more, and then the last one, this isn't my army anymore because, then you move directly into a statement that sort of says, you're in full agreement. This is exactly what's happening. And the phrase is as proof of a decline. And the next phrase at the end of that sentence is feeling a sense of loss. I figured if both of those sentences were out there, you still have the heart of what you're covering very clearly without making a judgment call at the second. At that point,
No, it's not my proof. Yeah, I can wordsmith that to me. It's not my proof of it. I'm not saying. I'm saying that it definitely the people that hold a gloomy view or that hold they can easily base that as proof of what statements they had made. So
and so in the front part, you're saying these people, these conversations, these people that have the gloomy images of today's army. And then when you start using these phrases at the bottom of the page, it's we need as a proof of decline. We need.
Oh,
so that's why it looked a little inconsistent, really, with the whole story. Yeah, it's there, but that's why those two phrases stood out for me. So,
okay.
I'm on page 2, and I love some of your comparisons about motivating soldiers and so forth with uniforms hanging in their closets. I wondered if somewhere with what you're saying includes that there's I've heard it said things like, why are we soldiers only wearing uniforms on Sunday? It's a Sunday suit. You come to the meeting in your uniform, and nobody has any function in their suit, in their uniform outside of the chapel. and uniform at best is not inside the military, when they're all gathered together. It's when they're at battle. That's something, right? So
that phrase is only to say they're salvationists. They're soldiers.
Oh yeah. No, I love it.
It's not whether they wear a Salvation Army uniform, even when they go to church on Sunday. It's to designate who that is without.
Well, I had the privilege of serving.
Clever way.
I had the privilege of serving 9 years where open airs were a regular part of the story, and in Germany and so forth. And I stood out on a corner one day, and I didn't have my hat on. I had the full uniform on, but my hat, I was holding it for some reason. And the guy in the garbage truck drove by, rolled down the window, and said, "Hey, Salvation Army, where's your hat?" I mean, the uniform was such an identifier in the bars, in the brothels, in the places where we went, that everybody recognized it and knew it. Today, if they don't, right? Because we don't have that much occasion to stand in uniform, march down the street, play a horn, and tell people our testimonies or anything as much. So I like the reference to the uniform, and also the fact that it's not serving its purpose as an identifier. It's not supposed to be a Sunday suit. So but I love that you referred to it there. And so that just a thought that you spawned when by reading it and by that particular phrase. Powerful statement. We can learn much from our courageous spiritual pioneers who scratched an organization out of the gutters where none existed. I like that line. Endured tremendous adversity for the cause of salvaging souls while they were laying the foundation for our international army. My comment on that would be their goal wasn't to make a big army. Sometimes
it's not saying it was. I'm just identifying that they did.
Yeah. No, I agreed, but I almost wondered if the word unknowingly. Their point was the souls where they were. They went at it with all their heart. They went to jail. They got out of jail. They went back at it. Those kind of things. And unknowingly, they ended up with a worldwide organization. Right.
I have to jump in here because I don't agree with that. There very much was intentionality about making the army as large as it could be, because they felt like the army was the instrument God was going to use to
leaders. That's right.
To lead the world to Christ. And So what you have are some early Army artwork that shows the Army filling up the city of Jerusalem, everybody in uniform and so on, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they very much did intend for it to be the Army to be the larger, because they felt like we were within the will of God. But
Yeah.
I don't think it was unknowingly. I think they're very intentional about making the Army grow. So I just say
Okay.
I
I was
just,
looking at it. I was looking at it from the part of the individual who's doing the work, not the leaders who were, responsible.
well,
But it's good.
okay. It's a debatable point.
Yeah, no reason. Just something that came up in my thought processes.
Okay.
But I understand the perspective, and it's true. It was the world for God. I'll do my part, right? So that's what was powerful. When we moved from the Christian mission to the Salvation Army, we opened 400 Corps in the North. Amazing. In that year, I said 400 Corps. We didn't offer people anything. We weren't offering them salaries, cars, homes, church buildings, and nothing. Just passion. Go do your work. So I love the fact that that's so vigorously expressed here and so well. Let's see, page 4, founder did not. The founder did not reserve the spiritual obligation to reach the world to only the officers or soldiers. It was God-given duty of every redeemed individual. I'm so glad you're emphasizing that. Absolutely true. The big fear of as we look at things today, we've turned over a lot of Army ministry and work to professionals who don't necessarily have the same passion. They're interested in it, they're skilled and they're interested. Maybe they can do HR, maybe they can do some social services and so forth, but they're not the ones who are always concerned about the souls of men. And so, like William Booth, he said, if you feed them, but you don't save their souls, what good have you done? So I think that's a great reference to all of that. I'm on your last page. We can choose to surrender to the face. Your basic outline of the choice that we have and what to do. Rampant humanism, good descriptions of the tensions of today's world, or set our feet firmly on the foundation of Jesus Christ and fight for every lost and wayward soul within our reach. Beautiful. Yeah, I can't wait to read the rest of the book.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to share?
Well, I have just a few things that I want to share. I think that you're in the midst of writing this, so hopefully it's going to be produced in a post-COVID world, and it's going to be published after this great awakening that we've experienced in the world this year. And I think that people are looking and hungering for a way forward. And they don't want to go back to what we had before. And so I think that that's something that you may want to think about, because what I picked up on in that first chapter is the state of where we are right now, but I felt like you were trying to take me back, and I understand going back to our roots and establishing, that early salvationism, but give me something fresh and new and relevant that's going to propel me forward in this new world that we're living in.
Yeah, this is just a first chapter setting a foundation, but each chapter that's already been outlined, it takes first off, it takes an event, either an event or a writing from the early 1865 through 1889. But what it does is it takes that and says, what can you do with it today? So it absolutely does that.
Okay,
Good.
very good.
But we're using, but the underlying characteristics of the people are what needs to come out for tenaciousness, no surrender, not no excuses, things like that. So that underlying, that was true for them, be true for us today, even though, yes, we're not going to do the same actions necessarily because frankly, it's a different world, but it doesn't give us excuse not to.
I think you need to sell that more in, and I haven't read the foreword to it, but I think you need to sell me more on that in the beginning to keep me reading chapter by chapter, knowing that I'm someone that is wanting to move forward and not go back to what we had before.
Yeah.
I feel very, very differently than that on Susie. I feel like this is the way forward. We have so wandered away from the inspiration that brought this organization into being that we need to get back in order to move forward, at least in the direction that God willed for this army to be. And I think you're doing a great job, Thomas. It was thrilling to read through along with you. I think that there needs to be more material like this, especially for today's army. I have personally criticized the school sometimes for not training cadets on the original works of William and Catherine Booth. And I think that's where the true inspiration that Salvationists are going to have for today is rekindling that fire that took the world by storm that's been lost. So I commend you on bringing that back to life. And I think that as you carry each chapter forward, I think it's going to have something very fresh, very exciting, very new for today's army.
Anybody else?
I love
Yeah,
the questions. Keep more questions. Think those out and make them really solid, because those discussions is where people begin to think about making a difference in their journey.
Good. Anything else?
I do think, like Susie, I do think there is a feeling of the roots movement that went on, like that the answer is going to be that we just get back to our roots. I do think there is that tension between what John and Susie, what both of you said, really, that there is some part of us that we do have to keep that beginning part in mind. I think the beginning kind of resonates with people that are in a place to say we're not what we were and want to stay in that place. And that opening in particular is like, I do feel like if that's what I think about the army and just want to talk about the good old days, it could feel like that's what we're going to do. We're just going to go reminisce about the good old days. And I think as you saw, as Mike went through some of those things, there's a lot of kind of rabbit trails for people to go off in their own mind and kind of sit and stew in that a little bit. The hope I think you'll get to as you go through, but I don't think that it's there quick enough necessarily. I also would question who the audience is. If I say Sarah, I'm going to ask you a question, Sarah. When's the last time you watched Murder, She Wrote? Have you ever watched Murder, She Wrote?
I've never watched that, but I know people who have. Yeah,
Right.
sorry, Major.
But as far as the people that are inactive, or I think that does speak to a different generation that's at home watching reruns of Murder, She Wrote, which then is who is going to carry this vision out, which is some of the first generation Salvationists that you talked about, which will make it something to a certain degree entirely new, but want that spirit of the old. So some
And
of that.
I can tell I missed the mark because and other people keep saying vision. This isn't a vision. It's characteristics. It's what these people in their time that faced adversity, what characteristics did they demonstrate? And what similar characteristics do we need to demonstrate today? And not getting hung up on, well, that was during the horse and buggy era, or that was when, you had to go around and light street lamps. That's not what this is at all. It is the characteristics, and it is putting it on soldiers and officers of today to not sit around and complain, but this is on you. That anytime we say those people or the headquarters or my corps officer or whatever they say, then that's wrong thinking. It's me. What characteristics do I have? What am I doing?
Let me just
And that's
say, jump in here. I mean, that this has stirred up this much conversation tells you something about the timeliness of the subject matter. That we obviously have feelings about this, all of us, and the approach of it. I think all of us want to see the Army be an effective soul-winning, mission-oriented organization. How to do that? I think that's the thing. So I think you're on the right track. I do think if there's still some uncertainty about where you're going with it, that's something you do need to address, as has been mentioned by a number of people, here. I do want to talk about some of the mechanical stuff with it, and talk about a couple of things. Oh, the other thing I would say to you is what you're saying, and I think this is very important to say this, and it's what we fail to do so often. This is true of the Western world. This is not necessarily true of Africa. Africa, the Army is going great guns. Asia, look in Pakistan. The Army is growing wonderfully in Pakistan, in that very radical Muslim country. So there are people who are out there risking their lives and literally risking their lives. So somehow I think we have to be careful about saying all the Army is like this. The Western world, I'm with you there. But I think we have to be careful about that. I just think that in general. The other thing is, okay, going back to mechanical things, Corps. When you talk about a Corps being like the Atlanta Temple Corps, the C of Corps is capitalized. When you're talking about just being a Corps, it's lowercase. So all those times you have to take that and move those all down to lowercase. All right. The other thing is, in the last next to last line of your first paragraph, you say these cynical conversation starters. And I felt like some of these are not cynical, they're anguished. People are anguished because they remember a better time, and they're not cynical about it. So I think that word cynical is too harsh a word, or cynical, or maybe anguished. You might give several different things that, depending on your point of view. POV is what they have now with the young people say, POV. I learned that just last week, so I'm kind of proud of myself. Anyway, depending on your point of view, whether you're cynical or anguished or mystified, whatever, but to just have that land on that one word cynical, I think is a bit hard. Okay. Let me keep moving. Also, and I do like Murder, She Wrote, and I'm one of the ones who still watch it, but it's been off the air for about 25 years now, I think. Anyway, you could say something like one of the reality shows like American Idol get the same effect. Or what's the one that...
you just say Netflix.
Netflix, yeah. Yeah, that's even better. Netflix would be better. And
I was trying to think of something people would watch on Sunday morning. I was like, what are they watching? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, they'll watch Netflix anytime. But both Sports Center and Murder, She Wrote should be in italics. They should not be just stated as they are. This is a mechanical thing. Okay, and the next paragraph, I'm on page 2. Page 2, where it says our challenge is people. But which generation? ? The one that served in the trenches of World War I should be a question mark there. Those Salvations who fed the masses in soup lines during the Great Depression? ? Or what about the generations who have the Army working country after country around the world? So I'd make that 4 questions rather than just one long question. I agree with Mike that phrase, scratch an organization out of the gutters, is a great phrase. Same thing on page 3, the second full paragraph. You have gospel capitalized. Here's the rule on gospel. When you're talking about preaching the gospel, that's lowercase. When you talk about the Gospel of John, that's uppercase. Okay, so that's the difference in when you capitalize the G in gospel or not. Oh, that's fascinating. I knew it would be. Okay. Also on scripture, on next page, you almost have it right. when you do the scripture at the end, where you have servant of Christ there, you see that?
Uh-huh.
Put a quote mark there, no period. Put the period after the scripture reference in the period, no quote mark afterwards. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Also, where you cite William Booth's pamphlet, that should not be underlined. That should be in italics. Oh, fascinating. Yes. Okay. Then also, when you're referring to the founder of the Salvation Army, we always capitalize the F of founder, like you would deity. I don't know why, but we do. The founder. Now, if you're talking about the founders, which would include William, Catherine, Cadman, Brengle, it would be lowercase. Okay. Also, there's another good phrase I liked. At the bottom of page 4, next to the last line, who were the earth shakers and soul claimers. I like that. That's good. That's good. I think overall, Thomas, I would say to you is this chapter needs a little bit more work, and because you got to grab them that first chapter. And I do agree. I think Josh said it about giving them some hope right off, and we might mention somewhere else in the world where the Army is growing rapidly, and where there is people are sacrificing and so on. So I just leave that with you. This is your book. All right. But again, obviously from the conversation we've just had here, we got into a whole thing about this subject matter, and that tells me you're on the right track. So
do the next chapters, do they highlight individuals or characteristics? Like, is each chapter?
Each chapter, I did a lot of research using British News archives, and I took some have specific stories of specific officers or soldiers. Some are, and then some are the writings of various other Salvationists. It's not all William Booth, Catherine Booth stuff, and then telling the story, drawing out the characteristic of that they showed, whatever that may be. I'm shocked reading back through the archives on how many Salvationists went to prison.
Yeah. Listen, let me just put in a little plug in for a book. The General Next to God by Richard Collier. It's out of print, so you have to buy it used. Is the finest book I have ever read, written by a non-Salvationist about the Salvation Army. And I would say it's the best biography of William Booth I've read, period. It is just outstanding. The writing is beyond excellent, but he weaves in the very thing we're talking about. He weaves in, it's not just about William Booth, it's about the early Salvation Army. And he weaves in these wonderful, wonderful stories of individuals who did things in incredible ways. And I decided one day I was going to just read a section in one of my Sunday school classes, and I couldn't read it without getting choked up because it was so well written and it made the point so well. So I would just say, folks, if you need a good book to read, a great book to read, General Next to God, Richard Collier. If you haven't read it, don't tell me, because I don't want to know. All right. All right, Sarah.
Thank you, everybody.
Sarah, we're coming to you. Oh,
Thank
Sarah's so
you.
excited. So Sarah, take it away.
You said you were going to be a shark, so okay. I just want to preface this writing with a little bit of disclaimer. This wasn't something that I had planned on writing. It was just something that, as I was reflecting on over Easter, I had realized that it had been almost a decade since this specific event, and I just wanted to write down how I felt about God bringing me from point A to point B, and just the way that he's worked through this situation. And if I was to have an audience at all, it would probably be like people on Night Watch evangelism, the shelter, whatever, things like that. So And it's just more testimony than article, but I just wanted to write something and get it down because it's a piece of me. Anyways,
Okay.
I digress. Okay. Growing up, Easter was about colorful baskets filled with candy and a bunny who hid pastel eggs in our yard. I heard sermons about the crucifixion of Jesus and how he rose from the tomb 3 days later. In my teen years, Easter was an afterthought. In my 20s, my life was in shambles as I struggled living a life in the core, leading the youth, and being in an abusive marriage. The night before Easter 2014, my husband and I got into an intense argument about his drinking and my stubbornness. The argument escalated. He violently threw his PlayStation controller, busting the television. He chased me into the living room where he pushed me down and wrapped his cold hands around my neck, choking the life out of me. It felt like time went so fast, but also stood still. I believed this was the night he was going to kill me. The next morning, I got ready for church as usual, as this was not the first or the last time. I would have to hide bruises and lie to others about what happened. The routine was as follows: pick up the kids, hide the Easter eggs, make sure they are happy, and create a smile. Wash, rinse, repeat. What does this horrific story have to do with Easter? Trauma has a way of revealing itself through reminiscent smells, anniversaries, and especially holidays. For years after that horrific night, Easter had a black cloud reminding me of my past marriage and the darkness I had lived through, the hurt, the betrayal, and the pain of that night. I numbed my pain, anxiety, and depression through alcohol. I masked the scars by hurting those around me and getting myself into situations that were difficult to escape. I didn't want to hear the name Jesus, even though I was still a youth leader and called myself a Christian. I faced both spiritual and physical death. It wasn't until God gave me the strength and courage to truly find him that I began to heal. As I dove deeper into the word and allowed him to guide my life, I began to understand the reason and purpose of Easter Sunday. I allowed the impact of the cross to change my life completely. Jesus' death is a reminder of my complete freedom in Christ, the freedom all of us can have, debt-free. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then. Do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. New International Version, Galatians 5:1. And I forgot the end quote. Jesus knew betrayal. He felt agony. He is truly God and truly man, and in his human form, he did not hide from the cross, but he carried it. For all of us, he bled and died for our sins. As he died, he said, "It is finished." But 3 days later, he rose from the dead. He is the resurrected King who has set me free, free from the bondage and my shame, free from the pain of abuse and guilt. I no longer am afraid to face the trauma from that night or that marriage. I have been set free. On Resurrection Sunday, I celebrate the victory that belongs to the Lord. Physical death could not hold him down, so spiritual death will not hold me down. Instead of feeling the cloud of doom and despair over Easter, I instead feel excited to embrace the Lord in his resurrection. I know that despite my circumstance, it is his breath in my lungs and no one can steal it. It is his joy in my heart and I can feel it. Let down the weight of the past, surrender completely to him, and celebrate Resurrection Sunday with me. For who the Son sets free is free indeed.
Very, very good. First of all, thank you for your courage in sharing this. It's a just thank you for that. It's we don't want to minimize that in any way. Before I say anything, does anybody want to say anything?
And it won't hurt my feelings, even though it's very deeply personal, because I want to make this as best as I can. So I just want to let you guys know that part. So bring it on.
Okay.
Sarah, I loved your piece. It was truly powerful, especially how you addressed the issue of hiding the things that you were struggling with and then putting on a face and your uniform and showing up and going through the responsibilities. I think that that's something that many people can probably relate with, who would take a lot from this article and say, you know what, I've got my own secrets and it's not doing me any good to hold these and harbor these things. Maybe I need to just bring them to the Lord and see how he can deliver me of these things and give me new life. So I think that was so very, very vocally present in your piece here. So thank you for that. And I especially, this is the second thing, I especially like how you did not pin the blame, even though you were pointing out those triggers, the reminiscent smells, anniversaries, all that stuff. It didn't turn into like a lecture on how preachers need to be more sensitive to people who have things they're going through. And I think that's the better strategy, because all in all, the one who really needs to make that decision is the individual who is making choices to hide things rather than come and bring them before the mercy seat and allow God to help them overcome and claim victory. So I thought that was another important thing to mention. And then the third thing was a question that I had about the circumstances. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4. From your 5th into your 6th paragraph, that transition there, numbing your pain and anxiety, you face both spiritual and physical death. And then you move to the next paragraph. It wasn't until God gave me the strength. And I think that there's something missing, a very important paragraph that might describe the circumstances that brought you to that place that you found God offering you his strength and the courage to truly find him. And I think that would be a very helpful piece of information for the one reading the article, being impacted by it, the strength of your writing, to say, okay, where's the secret? Where's the secret? What were the circumstances that brought her to that place where she found what God needed to give her so that she could come out of this?
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
I can only imagine Sunday nights in communities where people were being set free and dealing with their issues. The testimonies, they weren't from the preacher, they weren't from the head guy usually. I mean, might have been directing it and leading it and guiding it, but soldiers and visitors hearing life transforming events and deliverance from things that they are experiencing themselves, and telling nobody, again, the word, the hidden, and so forth. I'm stunned at people's lives sometimes, as many as we've been exposed to, just to hear a testimony that's genuine and real and expressed beautifully and well done here. I would love that in a session where other people were telling about their stories and so forth, and it would resonate.
Anyone else?
I wanted to say that I think it's a very important story and very, very needed. And I would encourage you to consider the National Women's Ministry online to land that. It seems like they're always looking for articles, and that would be such a great place for it. The other one I smiled at, you did a 2, and I wanted the third one, free from, and I'm like, oh, there's got to be another free from. So I don't know where that was, but just a beautiful article. Thank you.
Thank you.
And when you do that, include that paragraph that John talked about.
Yes, I put it, made a note.
Yeah, between I faced the death until God gave you the strength, something in there. Yeah, how that
Yes.
happened. Yeah.
Okay, someone else, or are we? All right, well, let me just share a few things. I very much urge you to submit this somewhere for publication once we get it polished up a little bit more. The second paragraph, though, let's look at some things to make it stronger.
Okay.
Next to the last line on your second paragraph, you said choking the life out of me. Well, choking the life out of me would mean you died. So you have to say nearly
Okay.
choking the life out of me to be accurate. I know that's petty, but nonetheless. The you see how in the fourth paragraph is a one sentence paragraph. What does this horrific story have to do with Easter? That's very good to put a question like that, set off by itself as a one line paragraph. I'm just saying this for everybody, because it does say things are going to turn here. And it signals that. And it's a good question. And the people say, well, I want to know the answer. So I want to see what the answer is. So I just commend you for that. Then the last, you actually have a sentence, what do you call it? A phrase, not a full sentence. The next paragraph, the hurt, the betrayal, and the pain of that night. Even though that's a phrase, leave it alone. You know, there's sometimes, this is where you break the rules intelligently. Not everything has to be a complete sentence. And I think that just emphasizes the state of, like, a little bit of the state of confusion kind of thing, and the chaos, if you will. So keep that like you have it. I fully agree between the paragraph on I numbed and it wasn't until, those two paragraphs, it's a bit of an abrupt transition. And we need to have some more idea of the process. What happened? You were in a horrible marriage, which you're obviously not in anymore. So, and facing the need to get out of that marriage, knowing that there are people who are struggling with that very question right now, who are Christians, about when do you stay and when do you go? And, you know, especially when they have children who could be harmed by an abusive person. How did you get that way and have it feel that you were still within the will of God? So I think you need to give us a bit more, maybe not just one paragraph, maybe a couple of paragraphs here on that. The other thing is your scripture citation there. You don't have to write it New International Version, just put NIV. And it doesn't need to be in italics. None of that should be in italics there. It should be just in regular type. But if people don't know, it's very acceptable just to put NIV, KJV, NLT, no periods, just all caps for Bible versions. That's accepted formatting. So just do that. The other thing I would say to you, Sarah, is you're inconsistent with your capitalization of he and his referring to the Lord. Sometimes you capitalize, sometimes you don't. So you need to go back through and make sure that you are consistent in that. And my rule is capitalize.
Okay.
Because I'm the boss. Okay. Going back toward the end of the last paragraph, you can need to drop it instead. You have, instead of feelings, the feeling the cloud of doom and despair over Easter, I instead feel. So you don't have to say that second instead. Instead of feeling the cloud of doom and despair over Easter, I feel excited.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah, you just drop that second instead. And I would say too, where it says, let down the weight of the past, make that a new paragraph. This is your application. You're saying you're turning from your personal testimony to now an appeal to somebody else. So take that down, start another paragraph with that. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, a very, and listen, I do like using Easter as the kind of the backdrop to explain how Easter changed so dramatically for you. I think that's a great, I mean, Easter represents hope, and how Easter was anything but hope. Well, it started hopeful when you were a child, became anything but hope, and now it's back to hope again. That's just like a symphony, and that moves through very nicely through the different movements. So just you know, work on that a bit more, and then you know, kind of, if you would like me to take a look at it when you get done, I'll be happy to do that for you.
Okay, yes, I would.
Yeah, and it won't be in front of everybody like this.
Okay.
We'll do it in private, and you can keep your dignity, and I can keep mine, and I won't have to be comparing myself to aquatic animals. So there it is. All right, is there anything else that anybody would like to ask or comment on before we close tonight? You're happy people?
These conversations from the pieces that come from your hearts, it's a nice evening. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, this, our writing should communicate. And obviously it does. And I think that's just, that's perfect. Okay, anything else? Well, if not, now I'm going to do a little bit different assignment next time. I haven't figured out what it is yet. You'll know probably by the time I send the link out to you, since everybody kind of has, wait, has everybody been reviewed on, wait, no, I guess some of you have not yet. Josh, you haven't had your chance to write an article and have it reviewed in this pairing, have we?
With Susie?
Yeah.
No, not with
Okay.
Susie.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll stay where we are. We'll probably jumble up Sarah and Anita and John, because they will have done that. So one of you will get me again. Joy, oh joy. Well, there it is. Such you're off to the summer and in good shape. All right, I think that's enough. Okay, folks, have a good night. And Susie, we're praying for you as you get ready for Singapore. I'm so excited for you. I can't believe it. If you need me to carry your luggage over there, just let me know. I'll be very happy to do that. Okay. All right. All right. All right. Great. Have a great night, folks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Not
Right.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.